Hello, welcome to the Michael Harding podcast. Last week I was talking in a hotel in Dublin, and at the end of it I got to a point where I was saying I'm bewildered. And it's one of the good things, what I like about this podcast, about sharing with you. It's actually genuinely truthful. So that when I came to a full stop of bewilderment, there was something in the kind of reflection I was doing where I felt, I'm really not sharing a deeper sense underneath all my ideas, all my kind of intuitions about the nature of prayer and faith. There's something underneath I'm not dealing with. And I've been thinking about it since. And I suppose I'd like to pick up on it now and say that the thing I'm not dealing with in when I talk about Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or all those stuff, and I say, if you practice this stuff, sometimes it can be very helpful. And the way to think about it is as a psychotherapy, as something that actually is a methodology that helps you feel better in the present moment. It gives you a sense of joy. Now, I was saying all that, and then underneath, I felt this sense of, there's something I'm not saying here. And the best word that I could come up with was the word bewilderment. I don't even know what the word bewilderment actually means. I'd have to look it up in the dictionary, but to me, I use it for an emotional condition of just it's not that I just don't know what's happening. But it's like knowing that something's happening and not having a clue what it is that's happening. Right? So, for example, if I said, there's something going on in that room down at the end of the corridor, I can hear the noise in that. What's going on in it? I don't know. So that's just, I don't know. But if I was in the room and there was something going on in the room, but I couldn't make out what's going on in the room. I could hear noises, I could see things moving around in the room, but I don't know what's going on. That would be a sense of bewilderment. And sometimes it's used for people, sometimes of my age. I'm 69, so, there's a kind of an ageist attitude sometimes to people that they don't get things as clearly as young people. I would have used it myself now when I was young. I'd be talking about some old uncle or whatever, and I'd say, he's a bit bewildered. And you'd be meaning that, in the modern age of technology, let's say in 1970, when people had invented tape cassettes. I don't know exactly the date when people invented the little cassette, but sometime around the 70s, the little tape cassette came in, and the recorder was about the size of a box of chocolates. You'd be going around with this recording machine, and you had a red button, you could press it and you'd hear your own voice, and everybody was amazed. And they'd be recording music sessions and conversations and all sorts of things. And then you'd be talking to, let's say, an uncle, and you'd be explaining this to him. Well, he'd be bewildered. He wouldn't be able to get his head round the voice coming out of the machine, or how could a machine catch your voice? And that'd be a sense of bewilderment. And it happens also at the present time because there is so much technology. Sometimes I find that when I'm talking to a young person, they'll start explaining the computer to me, They'll say, do you have email? Or do you know what Instagram is? Or do you know what Twitter is? And I'd be saying, yes, I do. Sure, I have an Instagram account or I have a Twitter account. And that's okay for me, but there certainly would be people of my age and a little bit older, maybe in their 70s, who would definitely be bewildered by all the modern technology. So bewilderment is a sense of confusion. It's not the idea that you don't know something. It's a sense of being confused by what is impinging on you and you can't make sense of it. And that's what I mean by the word bewilderment. And that's what I meant at the end of the conversation last weekend. I said, I'm bewildered. I really am. And it happens every so often when I'm talking about faith. It's as if faith is a cycle. If you think about the sun rising and it comes to its zenith in the sky and it gives a great powerful light to the whole earth, and then it goes over towards the sunset. And gradually you come into twilight and the light goes down. And it's a cycle, because as you go through the night, you know that sun will rise again. And it'll all happen again. And it'll grow to the zenith and the strength of the brightness. And the same is true for the seasons, where you go from the beginning of the year into this, the sense of springtime and growth, and then summer, and now we're at autumn. Now we're at this, where the cycle is now declining, and it will decline right down into the darkness of winter. And then we will hold our breath through the winter and watch the little candle flame and tell ourselves stories. And then the light will come back and the cycle goes on. And that's what I feel deeply, I suppose, about my faith, that it has come and gone all the time in a cycle. When I read the Psalms are the 150 poems you'll get in the Old Testament. They're very beautiful if you read them out loud. They're very beautiful if you know when people say to use them as a prayer. Well, the way I would explain that is to use them as if you were an actor speaking the lines to somebody else. And if you do that, you'll begin to get inside them. I'll give you an example. This is not necessarily my favourite psalm, but I think it's Psalm 84, and I know it because I remember it by heart. And it's a psalm that in the office of the church, monks, nuns, and people in monasteries who are spending their life in meditation, they would use this psalm early in the morning, to kind of welcome God into their life again, because that's the cycle. You're asleep and you fall into your dreams and your forgetfulness, and then you wake again, and you wake to the idea once again of God's presence. And that's a beautiful thing, but it also goes on in your life. There's a cycle in my life where my faith grows like the sun, so that it's really high in the sky and it's very strong. And then it wanes and it goes down. It's like twilight, and then it goes away, and I feel metaphorically I'm in the dark, The faith is gone. So I could be talking to you about the beauty of Buddhism, which I want to talk about this morning. I'll get onto it in a minute. But I could be talking to you about just the beauty, the jewel of Buddhist teachings. Or I could be talking to you about the jewel of some Christian teachings from one of the great mystics like John of the Cross or Teresa of Avila or Meister Eckhart or whoever. And not that I'd know anything about them, by the way, not that I'm a scholar or can explain them, but I can certainly talk about my enthusiasm for them. And I could be talking to you about that stuff, and I could be waxing eloquently about the beauty of faith, right? Or the presence of God. That'd be a great one that I'd go on about. Let us remember we're in the presence of God. And God, you might imagine that I'm walking around the world, strong as iron in my conviction, in my faith. And there I come to the core point. that there's a hole in the floor. It's called bewilderment. It's called a sense of confusion and loss, where your faith just evaporates. It's as if the noonday sun, with all its strength, mysteriously moved across the sky, fell down into the ocean, and left you in a twilight. Well, of course, that is what the sun does. It moves across, and it wanes, and it goes down, and it leaves you in the dark. And faith, for me, is the same. If faith was at the one temperature all the time, if it was like that you always believed at the same level in a kind of consistency, I think you'd need to question whether you have faith or just convictions. Whether it's faith like an openness to God's mystery, or is it just ideology? And there's no doubt that, ideology is something that we think about in terms of, let's say, Marxism, or a lot of left-wing political theory, or gender theory, or, theory about race. And they can be rooted in ideology. But we rarely think that Christianity, Islam, and all the great religions, they too can be rooted in ideology. You can have the whole architecture of faith, and it can be within you as something that is gossamer and fragile and evaporates like the sun in the twilight. Or you could establish that structure of wisdom into a firm set of ideas. You could create from it a sense of ideology. And so you end up with, Christians or Muslims who are ideological and who are relentless. So it's funny, because this sense of bewilderment, this sense of emptiness, this sense where you would have a moment, supposing you're listening to this podcast for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, and you're really enthusiastic, you're thinking, oh, Michael is great, he chats away there and he's talking a lot of wisdom. And then there's some more, and you turn it on and you turn it off immediately, because you say to yourself, oh, I've had enough of that fella, right? That to me would be a very healthy sign, because it means that you're not grasping an idea and holding on to it like with a clenched fist. It's almost like the wisdom, not so much the idea. Maybe those two things are parallel. Maybe there's an architecture which kind of is like as soft as your bloodstream, and yet it's an architecture of wisdom, a kind of a knowing, and then maybe sometimes it fossilizes and hardens into what you might call a set of ideas. So is it the ideas behind religion that you cling to as ideas, or is it the wisdom in religion that you let flow through you? And that's where religion, for me, always comes back to experiential. It always comes back to the body embodying a sense of wisdom or a sense of love, just a sense of being here now. And to that comes every so often, like a cycle of the seasons, like a cycle of life for 24 hours in a day, there comes a cycle where the faith is strong and rises up in the strength like the sun, and then it evaporates, and it leaves you empty. It leaves you feeling you can't hold on anymore to those ideas. And that's a place of great poverty, great emotional poverty, number one, I think, kind of a sense of emotional vulnerability. I feel very vulnerable. For example, if I'm doing this podcast And I'm talking like this, which I never planned to do. I never thought I would speak so personally and so intimately like this about my faith. And I thought that being a writer was something that, you need to be so much a modernist that it would be naive of me. It would be bad for me as a career move to be talking so enthusiastically about religion. But here I am and I'm doing it. Now, imagine I get a kind of a profile from somebody that this is who I am, and then someday they meet me. And they meet me on a day where I don't feel really emotionally engaged with any sense of faith. When I feel there's no God and he's abandoned, if there was a God, he's definitely abandoned me, I'm feeling down and depressed, and I feel sour, and I feel resentment, and I feel, life is empty. And then I meet somebody and they're all smiling as they come towards me, shaking me hands and saying, "Oh, I enjoy your podcast." And they're expecting to meet the guy who does the podcast. They're expecting to meet somebody who's, calm and serene and kind of exudes a sense of connectivity with God. And they meet somebody who's alienated and completely bewildered. And that's a very, very vulnerable place to be from my point of view, because the danger is that I would have a tendency then to pretend, to get myself out of this situation. Maybe I should pretend I'm as enthusiastic about God as I sound when I'm talking on the podcast. And I try to avoid that. If that ever comes up with somebody, I really definitely try to avoid it. I try, if I'm in a space of, Shiva, a space of mourning, of emptiness. I feel my soul is dead. My own soul is dead. I have no sense of meaning in life, or I think it's all rubbish. I'm looking at the negative side of it. I'm soured by it. And somebody comes and says, "Oh, I really like your podcast." I try to say, "Well, do you know something? I'm not like that every morning. That podcast morning is not me all the time," because we all go down. There was a great song by Paul Robeson. He used to sing it. And I was very fond of it as a child. It spoke to my heart as a child, because as a child I could identify that there were ups in faith. I would get a great elation sometimes. As a child, as an 11-year-old, I go into the little oratory in St. Pat's College in Cavan, and I would look at all the icons, like the statues of the holy saints, and I would look at the sanctuary lamp and feel the presence of God in that space. And sometimes I would have an enormous kind of sense of positivity when I came out. But there was other times then it would go away. It would just vanish. That sense of faith would go, and I'd feel like, at 12 years of age, there is no God. It's all sort of rubbish, bullshit, right? And just as much as it's a mistake to cling to the ideas, the wisdom is like your bloodstream. The wisdom is like the breath in your body, and you can feel it when you do breathing exercises. But the problem is that we translate that sometimes into an architecture of ideas, and it becomes ideology. And we do it on both sides, so that, you could do it when you have an elated experience of the beauty of God, and then you cling to it, you grasp it, you kind of hold on to it even when it's not there, even when you're not feeling good. You just hold on to the ideas, and then you start to really push those ideas like an ideology on other people, rather than experiencing the wisdom like in your bloodstream. But people do it on the other side as well. In other words, people who have the experience of alienation and isolation from God very often get far too comfortable by clinging to the ideas, the architecture of ideas around that alienation. And so they become very ideological in relation to just secularism, rationalism, and all the stuff that that would be hostile to religious faith. They become very much modernists in a Western European way. And they grip it so that they don't allow in the possibility of faith. It's very hard for the lovely, soft and mysterious presence of God to penetrate the heart which has reinforced itself with the architecture of ideas. The architecture of ideas is a scaffolding of reason and reasonableness that you build around the heart of who you are, the heart that breathes and pulses the blood and takes in the oxygen and in and out like your lungs. This just being here now, this being present now, this mystery that we are just here. And that's something which people who are alienated, sometimes triggered into alienation by some traumatic experience in their life, or because of the way that they were scandalized by people involved in religion, like priests or nuns or whoever, but they come to a point where they then cling to the ideas, the architectural ideas that kind of enfold alienation as an experience, and they then become more attached to those ideas as an ideology. And then it's hard to hear the little whispering voice of the wind which carries the presence of God when it comes to you surprisingly. I get this bewilderment, this sense of abandonment by God, the sense that I'm empty, I'm secular. All the religious claptrap that I think about is not really true, and it's like twilight. It's like the sun has gone, and I feel empty. But I feel that living through that is an extraordinary intimacy with God as well. So I don't try and hold on to faith when it vanishes. I actually let it go and just experience the alienation. Let the, it's like let your faith take you where it wills. Believe that the plan for you is for peace. The cosmos, the ground of being, the God, is drawing you endlessly towards peace, even when you're being drawn into places of emptiness, into the desert, if you like, into the desert of non-belief. And don't necessarily hold on or get neurotic or get worried like, oh, I'm not doing any of that prayer anymore. I should be doing it. I'm not doing it. I feel bad. I'm not doing it. And then you start beating yourself up because your heart is empty. But your heart being empty is okay. It's actually part of your journey. It's part of the beautiful adventure with God. This nakedness, this emptiness. And it's a powerful way in that cycle that we constantly strip away all the architecture of ideas. Because what's being torn away in those moments are the ideas of God. They're being torn down. The whole fabric of how I personally construct my sense of God's presence. Everything I say about Buddhism, Judaism, Islam, everything, it all gets torn down, always in one single moment, like the sun going down, when the faith goes out of me and I think, those ideas are just empty. They're just ideas. They're meaningless. And if somebody said to me in a conversation, Michael, I find all those ideas about Christianity very meaningless, I would say, yeah, that's true, they can be meaningless. And if somebody said, I find an awful lot of those ideas are very misogynistic, I'd say, yeah, they can definitely be very, very misogynistic. Yeah. I would agree with that, but it wouldn't be disturbing my faith because in a sense, every time I lose my own faith, every time I I lose my sense of enthusiasm for the presence of God in my life. It's not God that's going. It's simply that all the ways I've constructed perception of God, all the ways I've constructed a sense of understanding God, are being stripped away. And so it's like winter. And in the morning, it will be like spring again. The cycle goes around. And in the times of emptiness, I can safely create this space of vulnerability, but of, yes, bewilderment. Real bewilderment. That there's something happening in this emptiness. This emptiness is not neutral. This emptiness is a powerful tornado of emptiness. And I don't know what it is. I don't know how, I'm being led in this, but as long as I live and breathe and I'm conscious and feel love in my heart, I am being led. And that's bewilderment. I was going to say that, reciting Psalms is a lovely thing to do, and recite them like an actor reciting them to another person. When I'm doing a stage play, I haven't done one for a long time, but if I was rehearsing a stage play and I get the script and I have to learn the script, I would be here in the room alone with the script and I would be saying my lines. And I'd be trying to memorize them. And the more I would say the lines, the more I would become the person who is the character in the play. So that when you speak words, it's like you embody a form that's related to the words rather than related to your own personhood. Say my personhood is this narrative that begins at my birth and is continuing on now for 69 years. So that's my personhood, and I have consciousness contained within that. I'm seeing it from the inside out, if you like. I'm here in this bubble of my own personhood. And it's through that lens of my own narrow self that I can only grasp at little bits of reality and try and make sense of them. But if I then recite the words of, let's say, Thomas A. Becket in T.S. Eliot's play Murder in the Cathedral, if I recite the words often enough, I become, in a strange way, it's like my consciousness reforms itself around those words. The words of Thomas A. Becket, as far as I remember them, this is in T.S. Eliot's play. He says, when he has finally decided that he will speak out, he will be the martyr, he knows that they're coming for him to kill him if he's taken the wrong choice. If he doesn't side with the king, if he remains true to his principles, they will execute him. And he agonizes about it, and then he comes to a decision, and then when he has the decision made, the speech is as follows. Now is my way clear, now is the meaning plain. Temptation will not come in this kind again. The last temptation is the greatest treason, to do the right deed for the wrong reason. Now, that speech goes on, and I'm not going to show off by reciting the whole lot of it, but if I was learning that, there's an amazing way whereby my consciousness begins to reform itself, reshape itself around the words. And to me, that is the most amazing example of how the word, the logos, the words we use, in some way they're connected with our deepest sense of self. The actual words we use. They shape and form who we are. Like when you learn a script in a play, And that just astonishes me. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. The Word was with God. And the Word dwelt among us. You know, all that sense that there's something about the words themselves reshape our consciousness around them. Think about, for example, a lovely Islamic phrase. Oh, I was thinking about this 2 mornings ago. But anyway, it says, your words are like arrows coming from the bow. Once you release them, you can never take them back. And that idea of words like being like an arrow, it's a very beautiful image because it highlights how clear words can be. You know, there's something about an arrow going through the air that gives you a sense of clarity, of a straight line, something clear. But it also gives you the sense that how it's very valuable to use positive words and precious words and sentences that are affirming and positive, because not just their power as arrows, but because if you're using negative words, if you're using a word that wounds somebody else or is just self-indulgently defensive of your own position in a conversation, well, it can never be taken back. And the same idea that you can never take your words back becomes really potent when you think, as I've been saying, that in some strange way our consciousness shapes itself around words. We become different when we speak the words. It's true, and you know the way they say, fake it until you make it. Well, that's an amazing example of how you could be saying something positive. Okay, fake it till you make it is used in a kind of a funny way. But think about it as if you say, I love you. The more you say it, the more the consciousness of that will shape itself around the words. You will begin to embody the experience of loving more deeply the more you say those words, and also more intensely each time you say them. And if that wasn't true, people wouldn't be doing the talking that they do when they're in love, and they wouldn't be saying how much they love each other. It's simply a way that you necessarily embody a new consciousness that is based on the words. And you will find it with people who are, let's say, in therapy, and they share something with their therapist, and they say a secret that they've never told anybody else, and then when they've spoken the words, they feel different. They feel, I'm so glad I said that. And for years later, they'll probably refer back to it. They'll say, that was the moment that changed my life, when I said this to the therapist, or when I went back to some abuser and named it and said, this is what you did to me. Because they felt empowered, they felt, I'm speaking who I am. And the amazing thing is that when you speak who you are, you become who you are. And the other amazing thing is that sometimes when you speak, the words are there before your consciousness gets as far as them, and you're kind of dragging yourself along always to keep up with the words. And that's why when you speak negative words, when you speak harshly or judgmentally against the world, there's a danger that your consciousness is constantly reforming itself around those words, and you grow into being an angry person or a negative person. You form yourself around the words you speak. And there's another example of it in the Buddhist tradition when they're talking about the wheel of life. And the wheel of life is there's 12 stages of how we, commit actions which are karmic actions. They generate consequences. And they talk about, speaking or doing something. A karmic action has what they call a throwing consciousness. And then there's the kind of landing consciousness. In other words, it's like throwing an arrow, and then the arrow hits the other person. So when the arrow hits the other person, that's the action, and that has a consequence. But the throwing action is like when you release the arrow from the bow. That is also, you're only throwing out the potentiality of karmic energy, but the actual doing of it creates karma, because the shape, it's the intentionality of releasing the arrow. The fact that the arrow gets released from the bow, you mightn't even hit the fellow you wanted to hit, but you have generated a profound new sense of yourself around that action. You might, to use the metaphor of the arrow and the bow as words from your mouth, you might say things to the other person, and then you might feel, well, they were very nasty things to say, but actually he didn't hear them. So you'd excuse yourself and say, well, yeah, I know I said that, but he didn't hear me saying it. But the very fact that you said them creates a kind of a throwing consciousness, it's going out from you, has a consequence, as well as where it lands, as an action. And I think, therefore, that in any tradition, whether it's Buddhist or Christian or Islamic, the sense of the words that you use as being precious, and that when you send them out from you, you can't bring them back. So that's something that's always telling me to be careful, to stick with silence as much as you can, and listening. But it also has a good side to it. And that good side to it is when you pray and when you act out the words, sometimes saying the words like an actor becoming the person in the play. Sometimes as you say the words, they have the power of creating or refreshing the consciousness of faith inside you. And I'll give you an example of that. It was Psalm 84. I think it's 84 or 94. I'm not sure which. It's the one I mentioned earlier. You say it in the morning. Monks and nuns and people would say it in the morning as they wake, or as they gather together in the cloister, not in the cloister, but in the choir for their prayers, morning prayers. And they say, "Come, ring out our joy to the Lord. Hail the rock who saves us. Let us come before him giving thanks. With songs let us hail the Lord. A mighty God is the Lord, a great King above all gods. In his hands are the depths of the earth, and the heights of the mountains are his. And to him belongs the sea, for he made it, and the dry land shaped by his hands. Oh, that today you would listen to his voice. Harden not your hearts as at Meribah, as that on that day in the desert, when your fathers put me to the test, when they tried me, though they saw my work. For 40 years I was wearied of these people, and I said, their hearts are astray. These people do not know my ways. Then I took an oath in my anger, never shall they enter my rest. Now, I like that very much for a number of reasons. There is the sense at the beginning of it where it's hailing, the presence of God, and it's like you're talking about it like the sun coming into your life in the dawn. And so you're using that kind of metaphor to welcome God's presence. Then at the end of it, there's a strange kind of, it's supposedly poetically voicing God's voice, who is saying, don't harden your heart, be loyal to me, don't be like people in the old days, people who pissed me off, and I vowed that never would they enter my rest. And it's one of those psalms where you think, is this a kind of an angry God or a kind of a really bellicose, war-loving, resentful God who is so jealous that if you don't pay attention to him all the time, he'd just give you a hard life? And I think that's one of the surface attitudes that people have towards a psalm like that. But to me, it's more that God's presence is so all-pervasive, it's so complete in your life, in my life. There is nowhere that there is not God. It is just everywhere. It is being in all its manifestation. You cannot get away from God, so that even in your despair, even in your brokenness when you have no faith, and hard times come, and you feel down, that too is God. That too is God holding you. And so the psalm is saying, really you can't let go of that. If you let go of that, you are finished. But the letting go of it, the letting go of the all-pervasive presence of God, is simply when you construct ideology, when you construct ideas out of religion, and when you begin to live the ideas, when you begin to sort of, if you like, use the ideas of religion to judge other people, to release all sorts of venomous arrows from your bow based on your righteousness. Well, that's where you really have abandoned the God. Or when you firmly clench your fists and decide ideologically that you've studied and examined religion and you've decided it's not for you, it's rubbish, or it's oppressive, or it's misogynistic. That again is where you're locking yourself in a terrible architecture of ideas. So whether you're doing it, if you like, for religion or against religion, they're the only two places where you're abandoning God. When you commit to the architecture of ideas that imbue religious faith with meaning, and you start to cling to the ideas, the concepts, the rules and regulations, if you like, either for or against. In that sense, people who are atheistic and people who are zealously religious are both on the same side, because they're both obsessed with God as an object. The people on one side believe in God and they clench their fists and try and convince other people that they know what God is. And the people who are against God say, here is the God I don't believe in. It's the same God. They just, one side believes with clenched fist and the other side disbelieves with clenched fist. Both positions are inhabiting an architecture of ideas. both set of ideas are true as ideas go. But both spaces are, if you like, the hardened heart. Meribah, harden not your heart, says it Meribah, when your fathers put me to the test. Though they tried me and saw my work. You can experience God, or you can start putting God to the test in your ideas, in your mind. And that place of belief in the non-belief, that place of belief that kind of steps from midday sun, you know, the confidence where you feel God's presence all around you, and then 3 months later or 3 hours later, you feel all that sense of faith is gone. You have a sense of despair, a sense of emptiness, a sense that, you know, religion is completely meaningless and absolutely don't talk to me about God. I'm pissed off with that crap. All that feeling. Okay. How do you operate in that moment? Well, and this is the real key. It is to just be present, be here now, and breathe in and breathe out that emptiness. Live that sense of abandonment. Don't grip it. Don't clutch it. Don't make a weapon of it. But just experience the weariness of it when you have no faith. And trust that that is the wisdom of God in your bloodstream. That the very blood in your veins is the being of God. The very pulse of your heart is the being of God. It is the God embodied in flesh. You are the embodiment of God. And whether you journey through the pathways towards intimacy that are on offer from Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, or Hinduism, or Islam, they are pathways that will bring you to a deeper and deeper embodiment of God. And part of that is saying your prayers, reciting little things, Hail Marys or big complex Buddhist rituals, in ways that you will find if you practice it, that the speaking of words actually reshapes your consciousness. You gather a fresh sense of consciousness, like the way that every new day is a new day. I know there's a continuum between yesterday and today, but yet there's also a sense whereby I wake today, I rise today. St. Patrick says in that majestic prayer, you know, the deer's cry, Patrick's breastplate, I rise today in the presence of God. I rise today in the presence of Christ. Christ behind me, before me, below me, above me, inside me. I rise today in this. And you say the prayer, you speak the words, and just like the actor, the words begin to gather a sense of consciousness around them that then is embodied in you as you speak them. And that's the great methodology of prayer in every religious tradition. It's the same reason why in Islam a person will bow down 5 times every day to Mecca to acknowledge that there is no God but the God, and that his prophet is Muhammad. That sense of embodying words by speaking the words, and then the words gathering a sense of consciousness around them. It means that if you're using words from within a tradition, from within the great wisdom traditions, you're making yourself new. You're transforming yourself. There's no way out of your consciousness that I've ever found by exploring psychiatry or psychology or psychotherapy in a modern secular way, because you're basing everything on a premise that there is no other ontological reality that is dialoguing with you like a conscious being. All mythology becomes in some sense internalized in the mind through the 20th century in Western culture. I believe differently, which is to say I believe in the God, but I know that the practice of speaking words is a dynamic which gathers an embodiment around it. It gathers a new sense of consciousness, and in that sense, if the words are coming out of a tradition which is about faith in God, and if particularly it's the Psalms in the Christian and Judaic tradition, the 150 beautiful poems that are written, then you are using them to transform who you are by speaking, by being the actor with a script that is dialoguing with the God who is present, and very often in the Psalms with the God who is absent. So that a huge amount of the Psalms sing out of darkness. They sing out of abandonment. They sing out of loss. My God, why have you abandoned me? As Christ did when he used it. Jesus did it on the cross, dying. He uses a psalm to sing out his own sense of abandonment by God. Desolation beyond faith. And when you're in a position where you feel that emptiness and that loss, think of what I'm saying. When I'm in that position, I pray. I use words from the Psalms like an actor does. And as I pray them, as I embody them out loud, I gather a new shape of consciousness around the words, rooted in the words. And then I realize I'm becoming a new person. And that's bewilderment. That to me is entering into that space of bewilderment, emptiness. I don't know. There is nothing happening now, but this nothing is actually something. It is God's presence. And that's it. And I just would like to thank you for being here. I hugely appreciate your presence. I hugely appreciate the dialogue that you're allowing me to have in these meditations. So thank you. Bye-bye.